come here. I've been hearing you've been, having a rough time with your extractions, but I've got the plug. I've got the solution for you. It's very easy. I've got it right in here. All it's gonna take is just one little thing. Ready? It seems that almost every day there's a new product released with a promise of increased extractions, more even extractions, or just better workflow in general. And that's happened again with baskets. Now, we've had this movement once before when we turned from kind of sloppily made baskets to actually realizing their importance with the step towards precision baskets. But instead of going into that history, I'm going to link some videos below, one specifically by James Hoffmann, where he kind of talks about the history of VST and the creation of kind of the IMS, the VST, the Pullman baskets. Today, what we're going to look at are these new players in the field, starting with Doug Weber of Weber Workshops. He created the Unifilter, which was kind of a portafilter with the basket built in. So as you see, it's a portafilter all made out of one piece of stainless steel, and you have the holes right there. But today we're not going to do a video on this, mostly because this is the same geometry as the basket itself. This is just a much bigger piece. It's a hulking piece, and I just did not feel like it kind of fit into the video today. But following this, he was planning on creating a basket that you could separate them from the portafilter. So as he was making that, we had another player hop in the game. Wayfo has made a big splash in creating their baskets. They rushed these to the market, and they now have 4 or 5 different geometries, different hole patterns, before Weber could get his Unibasket out. You have an announcement from Swartz Design that he too is making a basket. And then about the same time, you have Weber kind of release his in December of 2022. So now we went from none of these baskets to a multiplicity of options within the matter of a few months, which is a great thing for home baristas, because the more companies you kind of have in this race, the cheaper and cheaper things tend to get, as well as innovation going up. So right now, for those of you unfamiliar, the sticker price on these is right around $200 US for a basket. But is it worth it? That's the question I'll be looking at today. Now, before continuing, I'm going to ask that you would take just a second, hit the like, hit the subscribe. I put a lot of time and effort in considering the baskets I have, spent multiple hundreds of dollars on them, and it would just be a fantastic thing if you would hit the like and the subscribe. It really supports me and helps me go forward with this channel, making the content up to snuff, essentially. Now, in this video today, I'm going to be looking at 7 baskets specifically. The Wayfo Single Origin Espresso Classic and Spirit, the Weber Unifilter, the Swartz Design Standard Flow, and I will be looking at the VST Precision, the IMS Barista Pro, and the Pullman. Below, I will have exhaustive time cues so that you can skip around to whatever tests or whatever explanations you're wanting to see, because this will be a long video. Sit back and get ready for nerdiness. All right, the 7 baskets that I now know intimately. So first up, I have the IMS Barista Pro. Now this has around 650 holes or so in the bottom of it, and they are precisely cut. And so we'll look at this in a little bit under a microscope so you can kind of see what's going on. I got this for free, but it was about 5 years ago from a latte art challenge that I ended up winning. It was like a 6-hour throwdown, and I won a Linea Mini, and I won a set of baskets. Next up, we have the Pullman. Now this Pullman is the 19 to 22 gram basket, because I wanted 19 gram doses in all of them to get about the same depth in all of these baskets. So this is the 19 to 22 gram, and it has 876 holes, which gives it the name the Pullman 876. So I got this one, I bought it from a European distributor. Next up, we have the VST 20 gram basket, which has around 730 holes or so. I bought this one from the same European distributor as I did the Pullman. Now, next up is the Single Origin Espresso Classic from Wayfo. This one I got for free from Brian Kwan, a fellow YouTuber who also works on marketing Wayfo. He sent me this, as well as the blend, the blend with the concentric rings, which I'm not going to be reviewing today because it's a little different from these, but I got this one for free, so heads up on that. The SOE Spirit I paid for. So what Brian sent me did not include this, and this was one that most people were asking me to go over. So I ended up buying this for full price, about $220 US. These two baskets, by the way, have around 3,000 holes on the bottom, so quite a huge step up from the others. And they're made from a non-magnetic stainless steel. And if you notice, they both have kind of a bevel in them. So it goes down and there's a little beveled piece right here. So they're not straight down the sides. Next up, we have the Swarks Standard Flow Basket. So the Swarks is about $200, which I did pay for full price, and this one has about 12 or 1,300 holes in the bottom, and the holes are about 0.2 millimeters in width. So we have the Swarks right here. And last up, we have the Weber Workshops Unibasket. Now this one I did get for free, added with my HD2 that I purchased. This beauty right here. So this one has about 1,100 holes in the bottom, and they're about 0.3 millimeters. So they're a little bit bigger than the ones in the Swarks. Why there's a movement to this more hole coverage, wider base kind of design. So if you look between the two, there's a massive obvious difference. First of all, is the base on these new ones is much wider. Okay, so it comes out a lot further. So usually in a basket, the top opening is around 58.5 millimeters, where the top of the puck will be. The bottom of the baskets typically are around 55 or 54 millimeters. So that means the hole spread, when you look at the outer hole to the outer hole, that means that hole spread is normally around 48 millimeters, okay? Whenever you have the hole spread that is confined to the side, well, on the top, you've got a few millimeters of coffee that doesn't have a direct escape. It can't go straight down, which is the fastest path to exit. It has to kind of go and curve and over-concentrate the edges with other parts of the coffee that have to escape those edges. So if we have the edges here, you see how much room of coffee there is onto the side. All of that coffee has to squeeze out that outer edge of holes. So what you have is very often this term called a donut shot, which is the outer perimeter of coffee extracting first, or so it would seem, because it comes out of the bottom of the basket earlier. And people for a long time have recognized that as a negative thing, a bad thing in your espresso puck routines. But contradictory to that, Stefane Ribes out in Belgium actually found out that that is still not extracting adequately the outer edges. So donut shots actually help with a more even extraction. Because those edges have nowhere to release, it's actually a good sign when it comes out the edges first, because it is showing that it is trying to keep up with the rest of the puck. So in his experiment, Stefane realized if you were to cut the puck with like a cookie cutter and measure the remaining solubles left in the outer edge versus the center, the outer edge was much less extracted than the center, because the center of the puck has the smallest journey to get out. It can go straight through, no problem. Whereas the edges, like I said, they have to kind of take a different path, which can cause under extraction. There's just nowhere for it to escape. So the idea was, instead of having kind of this funneled look of the basket, which is actually better for knocking the puck out, but instead of having this funneled look, is to bring the walls out straight and bring the holes all the way to the edge. And the idea is this would help with edge extraction so that it would not be as under extracted. I reached out to IMS a couple of years ago before I met with them in Italy and asked if there was a way that they could make a basket with the walls straight down and holes to the edge. This was based off some conversations I had had with Jonathan Gagne, the astrophysicist. And so I was asking them about this, if it was possible to bring holes all the way to the edge if we flattened the walls. They didn't quite understand what I was asking, so I presented it in person when I was at Host in Milan in 2021. But after conversations, they said they would make me a prototype, and then it never really happened because I think the machining of it is a little too difficult to do it in the way that they're making their baskets, which is a much thinner metal with a lot simpler process in order to create the holes. So being able to do holes to the edge, the structural support of the basket itself just couldn't handle it, is what I'm assuming. But in any event, it never materialized, and so now we have these other players in the game. With Weber, you have kind of a very orthodox kind of approach where we're going for just as even of holes as possible with consistency. So it took 4 years or so and was really playing with this idea of what's the ideal hole geometry? Is this ideal resistance or is it artificial resistance? What are we doing when we're doing these baskets? Do we need to have flex? Do we not need to have flex? Do we need to have straight edges, beveled edges, whatever it might be? And he came out with this. And then of course with Wafo, you have them kind of playing around with more kind of of geometries and more types of cuts. And so they have their own CNC machine, which is really interesting. But what they're doing is very unique to them. They're making kind of slits, kind of like what looks like little pieces of rice for their holes, as opposed to a typical circular hole, which is what, Swartz and Weber and everyone else kind of employs, which are these circular holes. When I was considering what would be the best approach to compare all of these, I reached out to one of my favorite scientists, Dr. Samo Smirke, out in Zurich, Switzerland, and asked him what would be a good and helpful, more objective way of kind of analyzing these baskets. One of his suggestions was to dial them all into the same exact recipe and then measure the TDS and extraction yield of them in that recipe. So I settled on a lightly roasted, washed Ethiopia coffee, and I dialed them in to 19 grams in, 45 grams out, with a 30-second extraction. There was a little margin of error there. It was between 44 and 46 grams and between 29 and 31 seconds because I would have gone crazy trying to get it perfect every single time. I used the Zerno grinder with SSP HU burrs inside of it. I used the Linea Micra, and I did not use a bottom filter or a top filter. I just wanted to see how these baskets would perform under just typical scenarios. Now, it should be noted that when I measured the refractions here, I did use VST filters for each of them, so these are going to be pretty good accurate representations of the actual measurements. A lot of times you'll see people not using the filters, and I've actually noticed there's differences depending on the coffee you're using and the way you're extracting and the basket style. It can skew differently, so there's not a direct correlation between skews of using filtered and unfiltered samples, sadly. So it causes a lot more waste in testing, but I wanted to have as accurate of results as possible. Now, what's interesting is there seems to be a correlation between, at least on the lower end baskets, the hole count and the extraction yield. So the IMS, and I don't want to make a false correlation, that's why I'm providing the data, but it's interesting to see that the least amount of holes in the IMS also produce the least extraction. And as you increase in holes from 650s to 750s with the VST, you also have a little tick up in average extraction. And the same kind of tick happens between the VST and the Pullman, which has the most number of holes for these cheaper baskets. Now, once you move over to these ones that have a much bigger hole spread, you see an increase in extraction overall that kind of levels out. Now, there are some variations, but I didn't pull nearly enough shots to have a good enough sample size to see objectively which one extracts higher across the board. I just did not have that many VST filters, and those are not cheap. So I think this gives a good idea though, and it shows that absolutely utilizing these newer style baskets does immediately give you higher extractions, period. Now, I do want to make one thing clear. Just because you have these new baskets does not make puck preparation any easier. I've seen some claims that they're a lot more forgiving. I have had the opposite experience. Well, maybe not, the opposite might be a strong word, but I don't necessarily think they're more forgiving. You're still gonna be fighting and combating channeling. In fact, I found a lot of difficulty in dialing some of these shots in. I actually had a friend come over who's the current reigning Portuguese national barista champion, Rui, and I had him dial in coffees on all of these baskets and kind of give me his feeling on it. Now, he found that dialing in the VST, the Pullman, the IMS was a little bit easier than dialing in the new ones, which is to be expected. It was his first time using these, and there's a learning curve there. But once he dialed in the newer ones, even to similar ratios and recipes, he was immediately preferring the taste of these more expensive ones. With those higher extractions, you do have more even extractions across the board, which can result in tastier espresso. Now, one of the big claims that I've seen a lot of people make and has actually been marketed is that these baskets, these more expensive ones, don't flex. Now, I will say Wayfo has come out and said there's do flex, and I mean, you can kind of see here, there is a bend in the basket. So they're not claiming that theirs doesn't bend, but there has been claims, definitely with Swartz and Weber, that they don't bend. What I have noticed is that the Swartz one doesn't. And it is I don't know if it ever will. So as I'm sitting here swinging back and forth, it is still flat as flat gets. That being said, they all definitely flex under pressure, which is kind of the biggest claim there. And then you have the Weber one, which has some flex now in it as it's been used. They kind of bow out just a little bit and kind of set in place. Now, this bowing happened within a few shots, and then it's stayed constant since then. When you look up close, they all do flex. Even the Swartz one does flex when it's under pressure. And one of the claims was if it flexes, it can cause cracking in the puck. Well, they all flex, so that's kind of a moot point. Now, something that I think is interesting to look at is the actual hole spread. We're gonna just take some calipers and we'll take a look at that right now. The top opening of these baskets are around 58.8. Okay, so 58.5 was where the puck normally goes as it tapers in. The bottom on the WAFO is 58.5. From edge to edge, the whole spread is about 53.3. Okay, so that's what we kind of have on these WAFOs. Let me double check this one. Yep, 53.3. Now the Swarks, 58.8. Inside, it's hard for me to measure the base right here, but from the outside to the outside, it's about 60 millimeters. So the top, that doesn't mean it gets bigger at the bottom. That's the outside. I was measuring inside on the top and then outside. So the fact that this one goes down to 58 shows that it is quite a bit smaller, 2 millimeters in fact, than the base of this one from outside to outside. From hole to hole, edge to edge, we're at 57.7 roughly. So almost completely covered. So if you have 58.5 as that top part of your puck, you have 57.7-ish on the bottom part, which is almost full spread. So all of that coffee has complete freedom to leave the puck in a straight fashion. With the Weber, the top we have 58.8 as per usual, and then the base is 60.7, and the whole spread is 56.5. So the Swarks has a little bit more of a whole spread. And just to kind of, I'm sure you're wondering about these other baskets, we'll just quickly show you the whole spread there. The whole spread on the IMS is 47.29. The Pullman is right at 50. And then the VST is right at 50 as well. A lot less whole spread on those. So you're having a lot more of that concentration around the outer perimeter, which obviously seems to be cured in kind of these over here. Now I'm gonna link an article below by a friend of mine, Shay, that he did a little comparison of the WAFO versus a Pullman and did a little different angle than the testing I did. And so I'm gonna recommend you check that out, but I'll have that down below in the caption. Now is business time. Shit, where'd it go? All right, so we have the microscope that I bought literally for this video so that we can take a closer look at these. Now, let me go ahead and start off by saying I don't necessarily think that what we're getting into has that much bearing on the end result of what is actually going to happen in extraction, but it could. And so we're going to take a look, we're going to discuss it, and then we'll kind of move forward. So let's go ahead and start with the kind of cheaper baskets. We're going to start with the IMS, the Barista Pro. So there you see one of the holes on the VST. So you see there's a like kind of a cone shape surrounding the hole. They say this helps to not block the exits. So you can see the holes are pretty well rounded. They're not very jagged. They look pretty good. There's not really a spot for coffee to kind of get stuck. These are, of course, machined holes, all right? So later on, we'll see laser cut holes and we'll be able to kind of decide what we think is better, but what you can see there is you know, pretty clean holes. So we're gonna kind of move on to the VST, and this is, they kind of set themselves up as, you know, being precision baskets. They were the kind of the first to really push through with this precision idea. And so what we are going to see here are some really nicely precise holes, really nice cut holes. So you can kind of see here, there's a little bit of tooling marks around the edges, just like there was on the IMS, but still really nice looking holes and very evenly spread apart. So that's one of the big things that's really important, is same size holes with even spread, which this does a pretty good job of. But of course it can be different from batch to batch. But the good news is none of these are ever going to be have any blocked holes. They have pretty precise quality control, and so you're never really going to have a blocked hole. But to be honest with you, a lot of these baskets now, even the cheaper ones, you're not really going to get any blocked holes. Ones that aren't fully cut out. That's just not really, if you're buying something that's decently built at all. So next up, we'll look at the Pullman, which the Pullman's actually super impressive as well. It has the same standard, at least under the microscope, as the VST. But what we'll notice are these holes are even smaller. So the VST holes were a little bit bigger than this, and then even bigger than that were the IMS holes. So IMS has the biggest holes in VST than Pullman, which obviously makes sense considering the hole count, with around 650 or so for IMS, around 720, 740 with VST, and around 876 with the Pullman. So as you see here, these are really clean cuts. We're right on that P that's engraved on the inside. That's what this is. So now I have a surprise basket, and I want you to kind of look at this and decide if you think these are nicely cut holes or if you think they're shabby. So we have the hole right there, and then you see the spacing. Not too bad of tooling marks there. I mean, about the same as VST, honestly, when you look at it closely. See that? So really nice, really highly precise hole cuts here. But this is a stock Breville basket. and it is made essentially to the same precision as VST according to them. I'd heard this before, and I never really challenged it because I didn't really know how, but wow. First off, I was able to get really great shots with the Breville baskets, which they don't have as many holes as the VST. They're in the 600s like IMS, so they're more comparable to that. But the holes are smaller, which is closer to the VST. So you have here a really nice basket in the Breville. So if you're looking in this realm, the Breville actually does a great job. And once you start using those bottom paper filters, as I've advocated for in previous videos and in this one, you're really going to get an incredible espresso without breaking the bank. These are like 5-6 euros, something like that. So this is, I have a huge stamp of approval for these. And then if you go watch Thomas Greene's The Wired Gourmets video, he thinks that the Profitec, I believe it was, their base baskets are really nice as well in his little breakdown of them. So I'm all for great budgets, bang for your buck. Granted, I don't think these are as good as the Pullman baskets, which I think are my favorite cheaper baskets, and I think it's a lot to do with the hole spread, the amount of holes, and it's precisely cut. So we have the SOE Spirit right here, which this one's going to have those rice-looking slits in it. So as you see right there, let's get a little bit more clarity. There we are. So as you see here, kind of the quality of the cuts are not as high as the quality in the other ones. And I think a lot of it's to do with kind of the funky shape this is. I'm not sure how the cuts are made. I doubt it's with a laser, but if it is, I guess the vibrations for making this shape, it would kind of make sense as to why they're so kind of inconsistent. One of my big issues with this is, and you can see it right here. Whoop, there's another example. Is because of like how jagged they are, you get little coffee flecks stuck in it. And these can cause different clogs in these holes. So as I scan around, look, there's another one. As you scan, there's some more coffee caught. And right before I started this filming with this microscope, I had done a Cafiza bath on all of the baskets. So it's not even really removing a lot of these coffee grounds that are getting stuck on those imprecisely cut holes, which is going to affect your espresso flow through the basket. Next up, we have the SOE Classic. So these are similar. They have the kind of rice pattern, but they're a little bit smaller. So they're like so. There you go. They're elongated kind of oval type holes. And again, you have little flecks of coffee that stick. But as you can see, they're all imprecisely cut, which again, I'm not sure how much that matters, especially with how many holes there are. It could be a moot point, but it does kind of, for me personally, when I look at it like this and I see how imprecise it is, it kind of just gives me pause on maybe the longevity of it. Maybe it's going to bow out more. They already feel a little cheaper, and that's probably because of my ignorance on the different stainless steel types, but it's a non-magnetic stainless steel that isn't polish finished, and so it just doesn't have that premium feel that the Swartz and the Weber do. And so on top of that, having these really imprecisely cut holes, kind of, I don't know, just, it's kind of funky. So we have Weber up next, and then we'll finish with Swartz. So these are laser ablated holes, laser cut, so the consistency should be through the roof. Should be a really nice consistency from basket to basket, which is difficult to do when you're kind of machining, and that's why you have those scores that come in on the VST cards when you order a VST basket. But these should not have any issue. All of them should be about the same distance, like identically. Not about, but identically. So you have a little rough edges, rougher obviously than the Pullman and the VST, because those are machining. You just can't really match that with lasers because they're vibrating, right? But really nice holes here, and like I said, a polished finish, so looks really good on the inside as well. And then we have Swartz right here. Oh, so there's a coffee piece of coffee right there. Let's get a close-up of that. So coffee is blocking that hole almost entirely. But for the most part, oh, there's another one. These are really small holes. Like I said, they're about 33% smaller than Weber's. So it's up, and there's another one. That's interesting. I've not actually had this many issues with coffee particles clogging the holes before on this one. It's about the same style cut holes as the Weber, same jaggedness because, like I said, it's laser cut, so it is what it is. But anyway, that's kind of the up close looks of each of those. Again, keep in mind that the jaggedness might have no bearing on it other than kind of getting clogged. And since the holes on the wafer are so small, there's more likelihood of those getting clogged more often and probably a little bit more annoying to clean. But again, I'm just kind of speculating intimidating. If you order the Wafos, I found they fit in all of the portafilters I have. Because they are beveled at the end, so they're not giving the full range that maybe the Weber and the Swarks do, which I have noticed give me consistently more even, a little higher extractions. These two have those beveled bottoms, but it allows it to fit in split portafilters, and you can use kind of stock springs when you're putting the basket in. So if you just have, a normal portafilter, you can fit it in with the stock spring. But the same cannot be said about the Weber and the Swarks. So we have the Weber right here, it will not fit because it doesn't have that bevel. So it's not wanting to fit into that stock spring. Same thing with the Swarks. And so Weber actually ships with a new spring. The Swarks doesn't fit either. So they ship with a new spring. It's very simple to replace. You just pull your spring out and you replace it with the spring that they give you, and then it'll fit nice and tidy. Granted, what should be noted is neither the Swarks nor the Weber can fit in every portafilter because they have that a little over 60 millimeter base. So you need to have a portafilter that's not coming in concave on the center. It needs to be straight down. So there are some compatibility issues, and I believe they both give measurements on their website, so you can measure your portafilter at home and ensure that it's going to fit. Now, quickly, I'm going to show you kind of the weights of each, and this is just one way to kind of see the like how premium they are, how thick they are, and because this is going to kind of contribute to the longevity of these baskets. One of the claims is that they should last a lot longer in a cafe setting than normal baskets. So they need to essentially outlive 5 of these baskets in order to really justify the cost. Because the one thing that I've noticed people is missing is the main kind of market, the main idea behind these baskets is for a commercial setting. Wafo has stated that explicitly. Weber has stated that explicitly. I'm not quite sure if Swarks has really taken a side on it, but it's more so geared towards a commercial setting so that you can have a more even extraction without having to use a bottom paper filter. Now, if you're curious about bottom paper filters, I have this video with Jonathan Gagne where we discuss kind of the benefits of that. In the Pullman with a bottom filter, you had almost the same extraction yields as these. So you can immediately improve your espresso by adding a bottom paper filter to your basket because it's opening up surface area for that espresso to extract and escape. So first up, we have the IMS, which weighs right at 30.25 grams. The Pullman, 36 grams. BST, 36 grams, just shy of. The SOE Classic is at 50. The SOE Spirit is at 48. The Swarks is at 47. And the Weber is at 58. So the heaviest is definitely the Weber. Now this one is cut from 1.2 millimeter thick steel, so it's a very thick steel. I know the VST is about 0.53 millimeters in thickness on the base, so this is a little bit more than double the thickness. I'm not sure on the measurements of these. The Wafo definitely feels a little thinner than that, but I can't really speculate more on that. The Swarks also maybe is more similar, but as far as robustness goes, these two definitely feel the most robust out of all of these baskets. Let's get into taste. This is the most subjective of what I'm going to be talking about. Obviously, showing that there is still flex even in these baskets is not really an arguable thing. Now, what is arguable, obviously, is taste, but I'm going to go ahead and try to communicate that as clearly as possible to you all, what is exactly is going on. Now, again, referring to my friend who came over and tasted with me, his preferences were the SOE Spirit and the Weber Workshops Unibasket. These were the two that he found kind of the best coffees from. The most balance he said he got from the Unibasket, and kind of the most exciting coffee he got from the Spirit. So I'm going to dial in the VST, and then we'll replicate that on the other baskets and see how the taste changes. So I'm just cooling down some of these hotter ones so that they're all at the same drinking temperature by the time I go through and taste. Of course, let me make absolutely clear, this is not the first time I am tasting these. So whatever I say here is backed by a lot of tastings that I have done behind the scenes over the last few months. The experiment that I did only took one day. Mostly what I was doing is loads of testing, loads of tasting, and so this is more so a reflection of all that time. So I'm not blinding this. This is a ton of espresso, so I'm going to kind of take my time, go through it, and describe to you kind of the differences. Again, what I did here is I dialed in these baskets for 19 in, 45 out, so 25 to 26 seconds. And then I just pulled these at the same grind size. This one without a basket is the VST with a paper filter, so we're gonna see how that stacks up. Now I've taken a few samples of some of these to kind of refract them. I don't have my filters anymore, so they will be unfiltered, but considering they're the same coffee and everything else, they should give us an idea, not of necessarily their exact extraction yield, but relative to one another. I have one from here, the one with the paper, and I took one of the Wafos and the Swarks, and we're just gonna kind of compare that. So anyway, I'm gonna go through and taste these now that they're essentially at the same temp after all that stirring. Okay, there's still a 3 temp diff from the first to the last, but as I sit down the line, we should essentially equal out. Got my water, let's get the tasting. This is the IMS. Juicy, sweet, a little bit of an acrid finish. Pretty acidic. This is the Pullman. Deeper sweetness, more of the sugar browning notes coming through, a little bit more pleasant of a finish. We have EST. This one's brighter, has a similar sweetness. It's pretty balanced, but the most balanced of those was definitely the Pullman. But all three, really nice shots. With it's a pretty nice coffee that I have going on here. This is the VST with paper, so this should essentially give us something much more similar to these because we're opening up more of that surface area. Again, I'm gonna reference that video I did with Jonathan Gagne talking about this trick of putting paper filters on the bottom. That is juicy. We're getting the sweetness, we're getting the body, we're getting the juiciness, we're getting some florals coming through, and we're not getting that kind of acrid finish. It tastes like a more even extraction overall. Next up is the Single Origin Espresso Classic. That's very bright, much brighter than anything thus far, but not unobtrusively so. Not like a sharp sour bright, but it is very bright. A lot less sweetness. Next is the Spirit, which, by the way, these ran in like 18 to 20 seconds because there's a lot less resistance. So a lot less of the basket resistance because how many more holes or how much more opening there is. So this is giving you a lot more artificial resistance. These are giving you much more or much less actual resistance, if that makes sense. So this one's more syrupy, heavier sweetness, heavier body than the Classic. It does a really good job with this coffee. It's not making it out to be sharp acidic, which is actually surprising because I would have assumed with how people are praising the SOE Spirit that perhaps it was more on the bright side, more on the floral side, but this one actually had a more syrupy sweetness in the Classic. I'll be honest with you though, I haven't been able to tell a massive difference between these two. The biggest difference is the whole shape. And so I think if people are really, saying that there's a big difference taste-wise between these two, probably blowing some smoke, but there's definitely, in this situation, there is a big difference, but I don't think that's necessarily how it works every time, and it hasn't in my experience. So next up, we're gonna do the Swarks, and then we'll finish with the Weber. That's a very good shot. So far, out of these, this one had been my favorite, actually, the VST with the paper filter. While these were good, and this one particularly good, this one just seemed to have more of a juicy roundedness to it. You were able to get some of the florality, you were able to get the sweetness, you were able to get the acidity without kind of losing structure, whereas it was not in these. This one was close, but it did actually mute the acidity a lot more than I would have liked that I was able to get in this. The Swarks one was really nice. It had a good sweetness, but it tasted a little imbalanced towards that. Let's see what the Weber is like. This one essentially gave us what the Swarks had with more acidity, but there is a little bit of a finish on it that's not completely ideal. So in my tastings, I've been able to tell consistently the difference between these and these. So yes, the difference is there, and yes, the extraction gap is massive. But again, I think one of the biggest advantages of this, outside of the nerdy people who feel like spending $200 at home, because I think you can get a long way there with just bottom paper filters. So I think this is huge for cafes. I read someone's experience that was saying they've implemented some of the WAFOs in their cafe, which it could be said for any of these, and what they've experienced is faster shot times without compromising quality and having more even extractions, which absolutely follows through and makes sense. These were 19-second shots, and they had texture and everything else that these had. In fact, they were comparable on texture, and these were longer shots. So we had the texture, we had the taste, we had the sweetness, we had the roundedness, we had all of these different characteristics that is difficult to get in kind of these standard baskets. So, is there a difference? Yes. Is it noticeable? Yes. I think that most of you would actually be able to tell the difference. On this table right now, with the contact time and everything else, they're probably quite similar. So now I'm going to turn to those readings with the VST refractometer, and we'll kind of see roughly where they're sitting at. The IMS was at about a 20.2% extraction yield, again unfiltered, so it's probably lower. The VST with the paper filter was sitting just shy of 21% at 20.8% extraction. The next was the WAFO Spirit, which was sitting at 22.1%. And then finally, the Swarks basket was sitting at 22.5%. And what's shocking is there is that big gap in the extraction, even though the time was a lot less. So I thought that they would be more even in extraction, but actually, even at 19 seconds, the ones with the massive hole spread on the bottom were extracting a lot higher and a lot more efficiently than the others were, which is a huge advantage. So if you take into account you're in a cafe setting, you can trim 5 to 10 seconds off your shot times. You're able to get more even extractions more consistently, and you're going to have arguably a more longevity out of your basket. Now, does that make it worth it? That's definitely up to you, the person at home. I can't really speak to if it's worth $200, so buy three, $600 to fill a 3-group machine, if that's worth it for your cafe. I don't know. What I can tell you though is there is a massive difference in taste, and that is what I care about mostly. Now, for those of you at home, is this worth it? Well, in a cafe, it's not possible to put a bottom paper filter in every basket. It's going to waste a ton of paper. It's going to take a lot of time in your workflow in order to replicate what these baskets can give without bottom filters. But at home, the difference there is smaller than it is going from a VST, for instance, to a Swarks or a Unibasket. The difference is smaller if you're adding a paper filter to the bottom of your basket. So do you need this? No. Try it with your bottom paper filters. If that becomes a nuisance, if you see that the upside of having one of these baskets is better than using bottom paper filters, then sure, by all means, grab one. But I would not say you need to, inject yourself with your gear acquisition syndrome and go out and buy this just because you need to have the latest and the greatest. These are definitely geared more towards commercial settings, and obviously to the home geeks that really want to pull out every single percent of extraction they can. These will do that. They are giving you more ability to extract at higher percentages. But again, there are other ways of increasing your extraction. I know that Decent Espresso has just released a new dispersion system in their Decent Espresso machine that is actually proving to increase edge extraction as well. So you have capabilities of from above and from below to increase your extraction. So if you've skipped to the conclusion, welcome. I'm excited you're here, even though you missed out a lot of the work that I've been putting into this video, but welcome regardless. I'm going to kind of do a wrap up right now. Out of these 7 baskets, essentially boiled down, there is a clear delineation between the expensive ones and the cheaper ones, and it's because of that extraction being boosted due to the opening of that edge extraction. Now, of course, there's still going to be channels you're going to find. It's not a magic pill that is automatically going to make you the best barista ever because you now have these baskets. You're still going to have a lot of opportunity for channels, arguably more so than before, and it's going to show the channeling a lot more. So what do I mean by that? Well, in your typical basket, the bottom is going to flex a lot more, as you saw in those slow-mo up closes. These flex quite a bit, and they actually stay quite bowed. That's why you can kind of spin it like that, right? So it's quite a bowed basket, which is going to allow a convalescence of those streams into the middle really quickly, as some marketing is rat tail, right? So you have that coming to the center a lot more quickly, and especially if you're using a darker roasted coffee or a really fresh coffee, the adhesion that's going on underneath with all of those oils and gases is going to hide your channels. There's always channeling in your espresso no matter what. You can WDT, you can sit there and tap, you can tamp with an $800 tamper. You're gonna have channeling. I'm sorry, that's reality when you're grinding this finely. So let's get that out of the way. Now you might see less channeling, but that doesn't mean there's less channeling. It just means that the channeling is happening nearer the center where it's being enveloped into that tail, that stream, the convalescence of all those all the liquids kind of coming out. It's just hiding it better, okay? The darker roast you use, the less channeling you're going to see. The lighter roast, the more you're going to see. So don't sit there and act like there's no channeling. There is. Now, it's going to look a lot uglier with these other baskets, especially the more rigid they are. So, for instance, in the Unibasket and in the Swarks, the shots are going to look really ugly the lighter the coffee you're using. If you're using really lightly roasted coffees like Apollone's Gold, or you're using Shay, or you're using April, or you're using Mood Trap or something like that, what's going to happen is you're going to have what is called like raining of the streams. You're going to have multiple streams coming out. And even if you run it for a minute, they may not coalesce into the center. They may just continue to drip the whole time, and that's fine. That's not a big deal. And it's because the bottom's not bending nearly as much, and because the space is so wide, adhesion may not be as strong because of how light your coffee is. There's not as much going on. The darker the coffee, the more you're going to probably have that stream. And you can see that in some of the videos I've posted on my Instagram, where I use a darker coffee in order to show how these baskets are working, and they do end up coalescing, all of them. So you're not going to just have drips all over the place if you're using a dark coffee. So the basket's not broken. The language is not incorrect necessarily if you're not having rain the whole time. It depends on the darkness of your roast and the freshness of your roast. I think it's pretty obvious, especially from the microscope, that these seem to be a little bit more premium in their build. They're all about the same price point. Weber's actually the cheapest, which might be because of scaling or something like that. But the holes look pretty rough on their cutting, and I'm hoping they might improve the quality of that, because I do get coffee grounds stuck in these holes quite often, which can skew your extraction. So these they feel a little bit, they just feel like they're not as well made. And the perforations on the inside for the names, I'm not a fan of, because it gets in my head that something might be going on. Both of these opted for a polished finish on the inside, and there's no engravings or anything. They put that on the bottom. So there's nothing really that could be going on inside that is outside of the ordinary. I have preferred overall in my blind testing shots from these. They tend to be a lot more balanced with a lot higher sweetness. These, honestly, they are hitting higher extractions, but they tend to be less balanced and a little bit more accurate, at least in my experience. Now, again, I know a lot of people that are really obsessed with the Spirit, and I do think it's a great basket. I think all of these do a good job for what they're doing, and I am very excited about all the different areas that Wayfo is taking these new designs. They're playing around with multiple different scenarios, multiple different geometries, hole patterns, and things like that. But how much of those are actually needed, I don't know. I think a lot of it is just kind of like playing with hole patterns and seeing what happens, which is probably what we have to do, similar to Burr geometry. You just kind of play with different shaped teeth, kind of like what Time War did with their turbo burrs, and you kind of hope that it works. These, though, we know they both work, and they produce really nice shots. So I am a huge fan of this trend going forward. I really hope that more and more manufacturers start to look into this and try to make it for cheaper. You don't need it. It will improve your consistency. So what that means is out of 10 shots, maybe 8 of them will be fantastic as opposed to maybe 5 of them. Those are just random numbers. Don't read into those. Now, as far as putting mesh screens on top, I like doing that for cleanliness of machines, but I've still not been shown any data to suggest it does anything to your extraction. And so what I've actually been using so that I can have a bigger dose, these thin screens from Swarks. Normally what you see people using, what I also use, are these mesh screens, but these are very difficult to clean. I do love them if I need to lessen the headspace with a smaller dose, or if I'm using the Decent, I always use it to lessen the headspace to give me more texture. But if you already are running out of headspace, these do a great job. They're really thin, incredibly thin. Bada bing, bada boom, bada shing, Shada Shun. Sheldon graciously sent these with my basket, which I did pay full price for. Okay. Good grief, I'm like 800 in the hole on this video, and I know it was a marathon. I know this is like movie night, and I know that you probably skipped to here. So if you would take the moment, hit the like, hit the subscribe, because I put so much effort in these videos. That would just be so helpful. Even if you just copy the link of this video, that counts as a share, and it helps boost my algorithm. So if you can just think to, copy the link, it will count that as engagement, and it just helps me so much. Thank you for bearing with me through this whole thing, and I really hope that you enjoyed the content. Anyway, I'm very caffeinated from sipping all those espressos, so I need to go take a walk or something. But while I'm doing that, I hope that you brew something tasty today, and cheers.